Resident Evil is one of the pioneers of the survival horror genre. That being said, it's easy to see how some fans are calling into question if the next title will return to its survival horror roots or stay on its current action-oriented path. Personally, I've been a fan of the Resident Evil franchise for quite some time now, and after the disappointment I had with Resident Evil 6, I've been thinking about what would be a good Resident Evil game to me. So here's a list of the things I'd personally like to see out of the next main installment of the Resident Evil franchise, presumably to be titled Resident Evil 7. One of my biggest issues with Resident Evil 6 was the combat and controls. I may be alone in this, but every time I play that game, I feel like my character is moving way too fast. Aiming is imprecise by default, and the camera was just downright disorienting in some places. Now, some of these things may be changeable through the options of the game, but aside from changing the aiming to laser, I found no real relief in these adjustments. That's why for Resident Evil 7, I'd like to see something a bit tighter in the controls. Something that mixes the classic Resident Evil feel of restriction with the fluid feel of the modern games. Now, you may be wondering where those two things meet, and I think Capcom actually already figured that out quite a while ago while working on Resident Evil 4. If you've never heard of it, check out Resident Evil 3.5. This was the original direction for Resident Evil 4's gameplay, and to be honest, I think the playstyle would have been perfect. In Resident Evil 3.5, the character would move in the classic fixed camera angles like in the older Resident Evil games. But should you sight in your gun, you take the over-the-shoulder perspective like in Resident Evil 4. Now, obviously there had to have been some issue with this in order for them to scrap it, but I think given the appropriate amount of time, they could work out these issues and use this type of system. If not, then the third-person over-the-shoulder perspective from Resident Evil 4 and 5 works fine, but I don't think the full fixed camera angles like in the older games would go over very well with many newer players of the series, and it would be hard for them to take that kind of step back. Oh, and also, a few less quick time events in the next game would go a long way. Regardless of your opinions on any of the AI partners in Resident Evil 6 or Sheva, I think it's safe to say that I want co-op out of the next iteration of Resident Evil. While the concept of playing the game with a friend can be appealing to a certain demographic of players, it is very difficult to get scared when you have a buddy next to you the whole game, and that's the main reason I'd like its removal. If they are dead set on co-op, however, there is a way to add it without it taking away from the scares of the base game, and this method can be found in Resident Evil Revelations and Revelations 2. If you don't know, I'm referring to the game's raid mode in both those games. If you've never played it, raid mode is essentially a small gambit through an enclosed area of the game. You'll be given a task to complete, and once you've completed that task, you'll be graded based on your accuracy, time, enemies killed, and damage taken. Though this mode doesn't offer any type of story, it should be enough for players who enjoy the Resident Evil playstyle and want to enjoy it with friends as well. In addition to raid mode, they could also offer other multiplayer modes as well, such as the Mercenaries or maybe even something new, but I just personally don't want co-op in my main storyline of the game. This is another opinion that could solely be on me, but I haven't really been impressed with the enemy design of Resident Evil since Resident Evil 4. Now obviously I'm not talking about the zombies or zombie-like normal enemies, but rather the biomonsters that have been in the game recently. Resident Evil 5 was mainly a retread of enemies already encountered in Resident Evil 4, with the notable addition of the Reaper, scary thanks to its one-hit capabilities more than its design, and Ouroboros, which always just reminded me of Big Black Spaghetti, which just isn't really very scary. Resident Evil 6 did a bit more in the way of enemy design with the various Javo transformations, but for the most part the only threatening enemy that I can even recall is the Rasklapenge. I have no idea how to say his name, but it is basically a retread of the Regenerators from Resident Evil 4 with a bit more variation to their regenerative abilities. For Resident Evil 7, I'd like to see not necessarily more diverse enemies, but definitely more memorable enemies than we've seen in the past two games. The story of the game is somewhat less important to me than the way it actually plays, but it is still something I'd like to discuss, if not just for speculative reasons. This will also have some spoilers to the Resident Evil series, so just be aware of that now. So we know that at the end of Resident Evil 6, pretty much every villain that's been important to the series is quote-unquote dead, with Wesker dying at the hands of Chris in Resident Evil 5, and Simmons as well as Carla dying in Resident Evil 6. This leaves the villain of the next game pretty ambiguous, and it will be very interesting to see what direction they shift in this regard. Honestly, for the villain, Capcom is kind of trapped here and will be forced to bring in someone new, unless there's someone I've forgotten about, or they decide to resurrect another character. As for the heroes this time around, it's hard to say who they'll feature since pretty much everyone was given some spotlight in Resident Evil 6, except for Jill, who got her spotlight in Resident Evil Revelations, and Claire, who got hers in Revelations 2. Outside of that, we have Rebecca and Billy, if you include them as main characters, but they have been mostly quiet since Resident Evil 0, so I don't know how good of a chance they have here. If I had to pick someone in the franchise to star in the next game, I'd have to go with Leon since he's my favorite character, but if I'm choosing who I think will be in the next game, I'd probably have to say Jill, since her spotlight was taken from her in Revelations 2, and she wasn't featured in the previous main series game. As for what actually happens in the story, I don't have any idea where Capcom will turn, since they've tied up almost all loose ends in Resident Evil 6. If I were writing the script though, I think I'd turn Jake to the dark side. Jake's father being Wesker makes Jake a shoo-in to follow in his footsteps by some turn of family history or something like that veers him off his heroic course. This plot could be further enhanced by making Sherry Birkin, Jake's partner in Resident Evil 6, the protagonist. This could make for an interesting story of Jake getting dragged into his father's shadow, while Sherry desperately struggles to find him and bring him back to the man she knew. Obviously, none of this is based in any sort of actual information, but I love speculation, and if Capcom was going to do something a little different than the evil corporation that wants to kill everyone because of reasons, this would be a very different turn in that regard. Location, like story, is another difficult thing to talk about, since it doesn't really matter where the story takes place as long as it brings back Resident Evil's roots. The obvious choice here would be a mansion of some kind, but that location has kind of been beaten to death, so let's move on from that. Recently, I've heard a rumor that the game is to be set back in Raccoon City, and while this location could bring back nostalgia for past players and offer a spooky backdrop, I don't know how likely that would be. If, however, they did choose Raccoon City, and again we're going into complete fanfiction speculation right here, and they did go with Jake and Sherry's story like I was talking about previously, then Raccoon City would be a perfect choice for two reasons. Number one, it returns us to a very nostalgic location for fans of the early games in the series, and number two, Jake would actually have a reason to go there. Jake could be curious about his father's past and want to go investigate the mansion and the ensuing destruction of Raccoon City, which was also sort of due to his father. However, the city and mansion would be in shambles after their destruction at the hands of the missile to Raccoon City and the self-destruction of Spencer Mansion. There would still be ruins around, and I think Jake could search them in hopes of finding something, maybe even finding a new unexplored Umbrella facility. This could also be a very creepy location of a desolate, destroyed ghost town, and the T-virus mixed with the adaptation of the zombies and BOWs to survive in such an environment could make for some fantastic new enemies and maybe some adapted favorites. But again, complete fanfiction speculation, and as long as the location offers for some tense, scary atmosphere, I'll be behind it 100%. Alright guys, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Resident Evil 7, at least at the moment, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, pretty much just me talking about what I'd like to see. But if you guys have your own opinions and thoughts on what you'd like to see out of Resident Evil 7, then be sure to leave them in the comments below, because I'm a pretty big fan of speculation and I like to read those over. I'm hoping that Resident Evil 7 will return to the roots of survival horror, and with the release of Revelations 2, which is in my opinion a pretty good game, I think they are capable of doing that. But seeing as their next Resident Evil title is going to be Resident Evil Umbrella Corps, you kind of have your rights to be concerned right now. But thank you all for watching. If you guys enjoyed this, then please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in my next video.